We are going to talk about circles today. This is another seventh grade standard here in Indiana. We are going to focus on the parts of a circle and then finding circumference and area. So with circles, we all know what a circle looks like. If I talk about the center of a circle, we can probably figure out that's what's right in the middle, right? Now for the measurements that you're going to hear me talk about a lot, if you see on my first circle here, the red segment, this is the radius. It doesn't have to go right there. Anywhere you connect from the center to a point on the circle, that's your radius. So it just goes halfway through. The diameter goes all the way through. And again, it doesn't have to go horizontal like that. Anytime I go all the way through this or across the circle through the center, that's called the diameter. If we're talking about circumference is a lot like perimeter. You just can't call it that because perimeter, we know by now, I hope, means you add up all the sides. But a circle doesn't have any sides, so you have to find it in a different way. What you're finding is still that same idea, though. The circumference is the distance around your circle. And then finally, the area of any shape is how much space it takes up. Think of it like you're wrapping a present. If you're going to figure out how much wrapping paper you need to exactly cover the outsides, that would be the area. So, area of a circle, how much space a flat surface takes up. Okie doke. So let's start first looking a little bit better at this radius and diameter. For radius, if I know halfway across and I need to find the diameter all the way across, then I know I need to double it. If I know the diameter all the way across and I need to find the radius halfway across, then I would divide by 2. I would find half of it, right? So on these first 3 here, I'm given the diameter. I want to find the radius. On number 1, this means all the way across is 28. So the radius halfway across, half of 28, would be 14 centimeters. If all the way across for the diameter is 13, halfway across for the radius would be 6.5. Oh, goody, it's not writing. There we go. And then on number 3, for the diameter, all the way across is 60. So the radius halfway across would be 30. Let's go the other way. Number 1 over here on the right half of the page. If the radius halfway across is 9, the diameter all the way across, double that, it's 2 radii. Radii is the plural word for radius. 2 radii put together would equal 18. Number 2, if halfway across is 1.5, all the way across would be 3. I'm just doubling. If halfway across is 36, all the way across would be 72. Okay? So it's really important that you know that vocab because the formulas that we're going to use for circumference and area don't work unless you know exactly what the diameter and the radius means. Circumference, I already mentioned, is the distance around the circle. The formula is C equals, that little symbol there is pi times d. Pi is a Greek letter. What we use is really just like an abbreviation. Pi is 3.14 in most cases. Now, you can also use other versions of it. If you have a problem that lends itself well to fractions, you can use 22 over 7. In real life, pi is an irrational number. It goes on forever. There's no pattern. It never stops. It never repeats. So we just use a very, very shortened form of that, 3.14. When they're right beside each other, the pi and the d, it means multiply. So I heard one time years ago, to help you remember the C equals pi d, if you're making an actual pie, even though it's spelled differently, that's what we all think of when we hear the word pie, right? C for crust, you make a pie crust out of pie dough. So C equals pi d, crust equals pie dough, and you can remember it that way. So number 1, I know the diameter is 10. I want to find the circumference. So I want to take pi times 10. Now, if it says leave it in terms of pi, Sometimes you'll be asked to do that. Sometimes they'll tell you to use 3.14. In terms of pi means leave pi in your answer. Treat it kind of like you would a variable. You want to put the number first, like a coefficient. So in terms of pi, I would just call this 10 pi inches. If we're asked to actually use 3.14, then we're going to plug that in for pi, and we're going to do 10 times 3.14, which would equal 31.4 inches. It's not inches squared, it's just inches, because remember, this is like perimeter. It's just a distance. Number 2, I already know the diameter. C equals pi d, crust equals pi dough. So I'm going to take 5.8 times pi. If you want to leave it in terms of pi, write it just like that, 5.8 pi feet. If you're asked to use 3.14, then we're going to take 5.8 times 3.14. Let's see what that is. Let me grab my calculator. 5.8 times 3.14 would be 18.212 inches. And then just pay attention to the homework assignment or the test that you're working on. Look and see if it asks you to round to the nearest 10th or 100th. If it doesn't, you can just go ahead and write the 0.212, but be careful if it does ask you to round. Number 3, circumference equals pi times diameter. So the diameter is 2. I'm going to take 2 times pi, or pi times 2. In terms of pi, I would leave it just like that. If I'm asked to go ahead and use 3.14, then 2 times 3.14 gives me 6.28 meters. So if you're already given the diameter, all you do is take that number times pi. If you're given the radius, you've got to go that extra step first. My formula is for diameter. So if I have the radius, then I need to double that first. So on number 4, if the radius is 3, that means the diameter would be, double it, 6. So circumference equals diameter 6 times pi. There it is in terms of pi. If you're asked to actually multiply it out, let's do 6 times 3.14. I get 18.84 centimeters. Number 5, if the radius is 20.4, double that, and I find out that the diameter is 40.8. If I'm asked to leave circumference in terms of pi, then I just say 40.8 pi millimeters. If I'm asked to actually use 3.14, then I'm going to take 40.8 times 3.14, and I get 128.112. Again, just watch out if you're asked to round. Make sure you round appropriately. Last one for circumference. If the radius is 7, double that, the diameter would be 14. So my circumference, crust equals pi dough, C equals pi times D. I would take the diameter 14 times pi. So there's my answer in terms of pi. To multiply it out, 14 times 3.14, I get 43.96 inches. Once you know the formula, it's really not tough at all to find circumference. Area is not difficult either, but it's really important that you remember r squared does not mean r times 2. R squared means r times itself, r times r. So where circumference was the distance around a circle, area is the amount of space that it takes up. It's how much it would take to completely cover that circle. Think of like covering it, again, one of the sides of your box with wrapping paper. So my formula, A equals pi r squared. I had a teacher when I was young that every time she would say A equals pi r squared, she'd say, but pies aren't squared, they're round. And I know it's like the dumbest joke ever, but all these years later, that's still stuck with me. So my theory is no matter how dumb it is, if it gets stuck in your head and helps you remember, then it's worth it. So there you go. A equals pi r squared, but pies aren't squared, they're round. Even I know that one's not funny, but it's okay. It'll help you remember it. So if I'm given the R, I'm given the radius, I'm just going to plug it right into that formula. Let's do it in terms of pi first, because sometimes you are asked to leave it that way. And even though it looks more complicated, that's the easy way, right? Because then you don't even have to bust out your calculator. So A equals pi times 4 squared. 4 squared would be 16, 4 times 4. So in terms of pi, I would say 16 pi. Area is always inches squared. If I'm asked to multiply it, again, we're going to use 3.14 for pi. That's our abbreviation. So I'm going to do 16 times 3.14, and I get 50.24. Again, inches squared. Let's look at number 2. R is 10. In this formula, I need R squared. That means R times itself. So 10 times 10 is 100. So for my area in terms of pi, I would say 100 pi centimeters squared. If I need to actually take that times 3.14, 3.14 times 100 is 314 centimeters squared. Number 3, take your radius and square it. Take it times itself. 6 times itself is 36. So in terms of pi, this would be 36 pi feet squared. To actually multiply it out, 36 times 3.14, I get 113.04. And again, this is feet squared. Now, this formula does not use D. It doesn't use diameter. You have to have radius. So if you're given the diameter all the way across, you need to divide that by 2 to get halfway across. So if the whole thing is 18, half of that for the radius would be 9. So now to find my area, pi r squared, 9 times itself is 81. So that would be 81 pi centimeters squared. Or if I'm to use 3.14, 81 times 3.14 gives me 254.34 centimeters squared. Let's do another one like that. Number 5, the diameter all the way across is 11. So halfway across from my radius, half of 11 is 5.5 or 5.5. For my area, I need to do pi r squared. So let's see, r squared, 5.5 times itself is 30.25. Remember, it's times itself, not times 2. 30.25 pi inches squared. If this says leave it in terms of pi. To actually multiply, take 30.25 times 3.14. I get 94.985. Like I mentioned on the page before, if it doesn't say to round, then this would be okay, but just pay attention if it does say round to the nearest 10th or nearest whole number, or nearest 100th probably would be more likely. Number 6, if the diameter is 2, that means the radius is only 1. 1 times itself is 1. So if I'm going to leave this in terms of pi, I get 1 pi, or you could even just call that pi meters squared. If I take that times 3.14, well, 1 times 3.14 is just 3.14 meters squared. I think I keep talking fast and saying 3.4 instead of 3.14. I am sorry if that's what I'm saying. I hope you know what I mean as I'm writing it. I'm at least writing it the right way. I just can't talk, apparently. Let's do a couple word problems. On these, you just need to figure out, is the problem asking you for the distance around the circle or for how much space it takes up? If it's talking about the distance around, like maybe you have something that's circular shaped and you want to wrap a string or a ribbon around it, that would be circumference because you're going around it. If you're talking about how much space it covers, like I know I keep going back to the wrapping paper thing, but if you're making an art project and you want to, I don't know, cover a circular shape with felt or something, anytime you're covering it completely, that's your area. So number 1, the radius of a wheel is 6 inches. Sometimes on word problems, it helps me to see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to quickly sketch a circle here. And I know the radius, that's a nice circle, isn't it? I'm much better on paper than I am on my Chromebook. The radius halfway across is 6 inches. How far does it travel in one rotation? Well, when a wheel moves, it spins, right? It goes around. So if we're looking at distance and we're talking about going around, that's the circumference. So what I'm really asking for here is the circumference of that circle. Circumference equals pi times d, crust equals pi do. So I'm going to take 3.14 times, not times 6, that's the radius. The diameter would be 12. Typically in word problems, you're not usually asked to leave them in terms of pi. You usually need to go ahead and do the multiplication. So let's go ahead and do 3.14 times 12. I get 37. Oh, come on, little stylus. We just had an announcement for the students. That's what that little dingling was. So I hit pause real quick. So I'm going to do 3.14 times 12. I get 37.68, and that's moving in inches. I want to keep that same unit of measurement. Number 2, how much floor space do you need for a circular rug? Well, I'm looking at how much space it takes up on my floor. That's area. It has an 8-foot diameter. So in my circle, I know all the way across is 8 feet. It's a pretty good size rug. To find area, I take pi r squared. Well, that 8's the diameter. So halfway across would be 4. So what I'm really wanting to do is 3.14 times 4 squared. Order of operations, I should have mentioned this before, but you have to do the exponent before you do any other multiplication. So this is really 3.14 times 16. Remember, 4 squared, not 4 times 2. 3.14 times 16 is 50.24. And those are in feet. So area would be feet squared. The last thing that I want to show you in this video, in my classes, I always tend to give problems like this because I have seen these on the state tests in the past. We never know in advance what's going to be on that test or not, so I can't say they will continue to be there, but I have seen them in past years. So let's look at this first one. I already know that the circumference of my circle is 100 pi. I want to find the diameter, I want to find the radius, I want to find the area. Well, here's what we know. Circumference equals pi times d, right? So circumference equals pi times d. Okay, we'll check it out. The C's match. I've got the C in each one. Why is it not writing for me? I've got pi in each one. So that means 100 must be the same thing as the diameter. So for the diameter, I'm going to put 100. Radius is half of that. So that would be 50. Area, I take pi r squared. So I'm going to do pi times 50 squared. 50 squared is 2,500. So 2,500 pi. I'm going to leave it in terms of pi because that's what I was originally given. My circumference was given in terms of pi. If they want it rounded to the nearest 10th or 100th, you just take it times 3.14. Okay, next one. Area equals 64 pi. I know area is the same thing as pi r squared. So look, the A is match. The pi's match. That means 64 must be the same thing as r squared. It doesn't mean 64 is r. It means whatever I take times itself, I get 64 for my answer. So really, I want to do the square root. What do you take times itself to get 64? That would be an 8, right? My formula uses an r. So what we found was not the diameter, it was the radius. My radius is 8. Diameter would be double that. So diameter would be 16. I don't know why this thing's being such a pain with writing today, more than usual. It's tired too, I guess. So for the area, Oh, I wrote area. Look at me. We had area. We want circumference. I got carried away with what I was writing for the other problems. There we go. So for the circumference, I need pi and I need the diameter. Circumference equals pi times 16. I'm just going to write that as 16 pi. Okay, one more. This time it doesn't have pi. So we're going to actually have to pick up our calculator and do a little bit of math. Circumference equals pi times d. So I don't know why I wrote this so close. I know pi is the same thing as 3.14, right? So this means to get the circumference, I took 3.14 times whatever the diameter is. My circumference is 28.26. So to get 28.26, I took 3.14 times whatever the diameter is. It's a one-step equation. I'm just needing to know, what do I multiply 3.14 by to get that answer? Opposite of multiplying is dividing. So I'm going to do 28.26 and divide by 3.14, and I get 9. My diameter is 9. The radius would be half of that. So my radius would be 4.5. Area, I take pi r squared. So that's 3.14 times 4.5 squared. So I'm going to do 4.5 times itself, then times 3.14. I get 63.585. All right, so hopefully that helps. Feel free to rewatch if you need to. If there are other things you need help in for 7th grade math, please check out my YouTube channel, Math with Luger. My students, if you need to reach out to me, you know the various methods of how to get in touch with me. I would be more than happy to help. But as always, thank you so much for sticking it out through some technical difficulties as usual. But I really appreciate you putting in the time to watch this. Until next time, bye.